Let's take a look at this question. What are the most significant times in Kenilworth's history? So, this question makes up part G of our assessment criteria for history around us. We can see here within this idea of significant times, we have three different ideas: peak activity, so the most important, the most exciting moments when lots of things were going on; major developments, so times when lots of things were built and changing at Kenilworth; and then turning points. So we're going to start off by looking at two of the most important, biggest moments at Kenilworth, and we really need to make sure we're ready to talk about these. We can apply them to so many questions that come up in the exam. So let's start with the Great Siege that took place in 1266. This was one of the longest sieges in all of England's history and a really key moment at Kenilworth. It lasts around 6 months in the second half of 1266. And it's all about this conflict, which has been running for a few years now, between barons, powerful people in the country, and the king, King Henry III. So by the time it's got to this siege of Kenilworth in 1266, barons and the king have been fighting in a civil war for a number of years. What happens with the siege is that the remaining rebels are inside, and this includes Simon de Montfort's son. Remember, Simon de Montfort owned the castle, but he was killed in battle previously. So the rebels are inside the castle, and they are holding back the king, King Henry III. Here is his army outside the castle. King Henry lays siege to Kenilworth. He believes he should own Kenilworth, that Simon de Montfort's son should have given it over to him, but the rebels are withstanding the pressure. And the king tries all kinds of things. We can see there a trebuchet. He tries to get boats to cross the mere, all kinds of tactics across a 6 month period, but none of them work. And that says a lot about how strong Kenilworth is, right? It reminds us about how effective the developments that King John I had made were. They really do make it difficult to attack Kenilworth. So this goes on for 6 months. The rebels are inside, they're standing firm. There's over 1,000 of them inside Kenilworth, so a very exciting, very dramatic moment. And this is really the only time of significant fighting at the castle. Yes, it's been a military defensive structure since it was first built in the 1120s, but there's never been kind of proper fighting apart from this at the castle. So, big moment, lots going on, very important nationally. It reveals a lot about what's going on in England at the time. And significantly for us here, this is a big turning point because when the siege finally breaks in December 1266, the rebels inside give up. They've run out of food, there's disease spreading, it's cold. They come out, and the castle is taken by King Henry III. Now, the ending of the siege ends the war with the rebels effectively, so that means England enters a more peaceful time, and it also changes ownership of the castle, because now King Henry III gives it to his son. And therefore, the castle can become more of a kind of palatial residence. It's not going to be needed for defense so much, and it's owned now by this rich young man, the son of the king, who's going to use it for tournaments, for festivities, and for a luxurious place to live in. The second key moment we need to remember takes place in 1649, and this is the slating of Kenilworth, another really dramatic moment and really significant one which changes Kenilworth's history. So, this is all part of the English Civil War of the 1640s, when the parliamentarians have fought against the royalists, with King Charles I, of course, who ultimately is beheaded, and England enters a time without a king or queen for the first and only real time. So, what's going on here? Well, the parliamentarians destroy large parts of the castle in 1649. And they're doing this largely as a symbol. This is symbolic of a change in England, a symbol of the loss of royal control. Not only is the king having his head chopped off, but castles are being taken down. There's a real change going on in England. And this really represents that. This reflects what's going on in the national picture. No longer, the parliamentarians say, will castles be able to be used to control people. No longer will kings and queens be able to do whatever they want. So this is a big turning point because, of course, clearly, obviously, Kenilworth turns into a place of ruins. And after this, apart from one building, Leicester's Gatehouse, no one's going to live at Kenilworth. It's going to fall into disrepair, and this marks a key point. It moves from palatial into ruins. So there are two key turning points, two of the biggest moments, peak activity and big change. But we need a few other examples too. So let's look at three other moments of peak activity and major developments. First example we have is King John's time of owning the castle. And we're thinking specifically here around the time 1210 to 1215. A 5-year time period where King John spends huge amounts of money, around £1,100, and he makes massive developments to the site. He needs to make the site better defended, and this includes things like the extension of the mere to become the biggest mere in England, the outer curtain wall, Mortimer's and Lund's Tower we can see here. So there's really major developments at this time. Kenilworth becomes one of the biggest, best defended castles in England, and there's a lot of activity going on. This is a key point where Kenilworth plays a really important role in the national picture. Second example we could think about moving into the palatial era is the time when John of Gaunt takes over the castle. And particularly in the 1370s, Kenilworth undergoes massive changes and again is a time of real peak activity. We see massive palatial building works, most significantly the Great Hall, this really beautiful, extravagant building that we can still see the remains of. So even though it's gone into ruins, we can still see the details of the tall windows, the huge fireplaces, just the size of the place. Along with the Great Hall, you had the huge kitchen and a number of other buildings which just show the way the castle is being used now and reflects this kind of peak activity of feasts and festivals and important, powerful, rich people spending time at the castle. And clearly a big change to the kinds of things going on in medieval military times. Our third and final example of peak activity and major developments is going to be with Robert Dudley in the 1570s now. So Robert Dudley owns the castle, and of course, as we know, he does a number of things to change Kenilworth, specifically with his relationship or non-relationship with Elizabeth I in mind. So if we want to think about peak activity, we could think about Elizabeth I's visits. There's huge numbers of people that come to Kenilworth at this time, accompanying the Queen. There's all this kind of extravagant theatre, music, plays, big feasts. And the most famous one is the visit in 1575. Along with this visit and all the activities associated with it, we have the major developments of things like Leicester's building being constructed and the Elizabethan garden. So how would this look in an exam question? Well, here's an example from a few years back. It says choose a significant turning point. So let's just take a note here. Always be really careful. Are we talking about one moment? Are we talking about throughout time? So in this case, it says a significant turning point. So we'd have to choose one. It then says how far. So this is so key in the exam. Make sure you really make a judgment. If it's saying how far, we have to say in a big way, to a certain degree, not that much, not at all. So the question here is how far did this change? That means we're going to have to talk about what it was like before the turning point, if we're going to show what changes after. How far did this change the site? That means what it looks like, the buildings, the people, and or its uses. So a really good way, remember, to answer these questions is to use words from the question and keep making sure that every paragraph we write begins with a clear answer to the question. So, for example, if I was talking about the Great Siege as my chosen turning point, here's how I'd start my first paragraph. The Great Siege of 1266 changed the site of Kenilworth a huge amount. So I've made my judgment, I've answered the question, how far? And I'm going to go on and explain some of the key changes and show how that shows it was different after the siege compared to before. I'll go on in a subsequent paragraph to say the people at Kenilworth changed in a significant way. Again, I'm making a judgment. Again, I'm using words from the question to really make sure that I'm explaining rather than just describing what was going on. Final thing just to remember, with all the questions, we need to keep on referring back to physical features. So whatever we're talking about, whatever we're explaining, we're always going to think about something at the site that we could use to back up our points.